Thanks very much, Jeff, and Alice for inviting us, and all of you for being here. Well, that changes the mood considerably. It's a delight to be back with you. A year ago, we had a chat about amphibians, and here we are in a vastly different group of animals, the reptiles. Hopefully, we'll find out by the end of the night that these are very different from amphibians in a lot of ways. But if you didn't catch the amphibian talk last year, I believe it's on YouTube and is right neck and neck with Bridgerton right now for most streamed things online. So should be in good shape. Also with me tonight is Amy Lowe, one of my students in biology, who is going to help out with this talk. When Alice recommended bringing students along, I was very excited to have that opportunity to show off some of our students and for them to get some experience doing this kind of stuff. So with that, let's get right into reptiles. When I was asked to give a talk about reptiles of the Texas Hill Country, I immediately went to find out what people already know, and I found out that the Alamo area chapter, Texas Master Naturalist, has a great website on snakes of South Central Texas. Lots of good info, all of it relevant to what we experience right here. So I want to thank you for your time tonight. This has been great, and it's a great resource. And you all have put, I know this isn't the Alamo area chapter, but you put a lot of good work into understanding biodiversity, and the resources that are out there are necessarily limited. I can't emphasize enough that what we talk about this evening pales in comparison to the experience of being in the field with wild reptiles. It really is an amazing kind of thing to experience. So let's take a look at some info about reptiles. For a long time, humans have been interested in documenting reptiles. As long as we know that people have been documenting anything, reptiles have been included in that number. And as far as herpetology goes, that includes things like collecting specimens, and we can even see some of these historical specimens in museums, as well as people's field notes and photography, which I want to talk specifically about, and of course citizen science, which I don't need to talk to you about the value of. Photography is an interesting and beautiful and today tricky situation where naturalism comes in. This is a classic historical photograph of George Washington holding an alligator. I just want to take a moment to caution against interpreting things just because they exist as fact. We do need to be cautious with AI. Artificial intelligence can put together some pretty incredible images. I had this one made by just plugging in the words George Washington holding an alligator. Now, there are some tells, and I bring this up because there are, unfortunately, starting to be AI-generated images popping up on citizen science services. People making claims that they saw something when in fact they didn't. If you see an alligator that has, for instance, 2 tails, you might want to question that. But I think it's a good reminder that we should always be cautious and we should always scrutinize the information in front of us. I want to talk tonight briefly about who the reptiles are and make sure we're all on the same page about what species are involved. These are animals that have the following characteristics. They have scaly skin. When they lay eggs, those eggs have shells. Those shells might be hard, like a chicken's egg, or they might be leathery. If they have digits, then those digits have true claws on them. And most reptiles alive today on Earth are cold-blooded. So for the most part, we're talking about things like snakes and the turtles and the lizards when we're talking about the Texas Hill Country. This also includes a couple of other groups, the crocodilians, a weirdo group called tuateras that live in New Zealand only. But if we're looking at this number and we're looking at what species have descended from ancestors that have those features, we really can't biologically leave out the birds. I don't have time to talk about birds tonight. I would love to. I love talking about birds. But the birds are truly reptiles, biologically in the truest sense. Crocodilians, alligators and crocodiles, are more closely related to birds than they are to lizards. So we really oughtn't exclude birds from conversations about reptiles because they are a fairly recent descendant of reptiles. Let's think about local biodiversities, things in the Texas Hill Country. What can we see? As far as snake species go, we've got about 18 species of snakes right around here. And before I move on, I want to put a caveat out there. These numbers are all approximations. These animals are alive. They can move around. Sometimes we're going to find something in the hill country we didn't expect to see because it wandered in or came in with a flood, or somebody moved it on purpose or accidentally. So these are approximations. But pretty reliably, we can see up to 18 snake species and 7 native lizard species, plus 1 invasive lizard species, and about 7 turtle species pretty reliably right around Kerrville and our area. Reptiles are often perceived as dangerous, rightly or wrongly. I'd like to talk just briefly about the rightly and the wrongly, about danger perception, where reptiles go. When you ask people why they're afraid of reptiles or why they think they're dangerous, the list in almost every survey has these 3 things at the top. They're venomous. A qualified fair point. They are evil or gross, and they have powerful bites. Now all of these reasons come from real experiences. However, I think it's important that we lay out the real dangers that reptiles pose. Because when we think about dangers to humans, reptiles certainly do pose dangers to humans, and they can have venom, and they can have powerful bites, and they can be gross. But in reality, people get hurt by reptiles most often by handling them. And the most likely way to get hurt by a reptile is to handle one and then not wash your hands, and then eat a sandwich or something like that. Most of these species live in places where they also defecate, and that gets on their skin. And they have microbiomes on their skin that are very different from our own, that we are not really very well equipped to fight off every time. So, disease from handling, especially pet reptiles, is right top of the list for how reptiles can actually harm humans. They're not doing that on purpose, of course. Diseases from eating them. Some of you may have seen recent headlines about eating sea turtle meat in various parts of the world. I've got one news story here, but this has popped up a couple of different places. There lists and lists. Don't eat sea turtle meat. Okay? There's a lot of good reasons not to eat sea turtle meat. One of them, though, is that it can kill you if it's not prepared in a safe way. That goes for a lot of different things, too. Don't assume that just because it's meat, it's okay to eat. And envenomation. But the key here is that envenomation is almost always, in the case of snakes, certainly snakes in the Texas Hill Country, almost always the result of handling. Somebody is trying to pick up a snake because they think it's cool, or they think it's impressive, or they are trying to kill it. These are the situations in which people are most likely to get bitten by a venomous snake. It's not that it never happens, that somebody might step in the wrong place and get bitten on the foot or the ankle. That does happen. But the greatest risk comes from attempts at handling. Yes. Thank you. Envenomation is the act of inserting venom into something else. So if you are bitten by a venomous snake and venom gets into your system, you have been envenomated. It's a good thing to avoid. Okay, so thinking about the Texas Hill Country, I've got this great AI picture of the Texas Hill Country. Where is it that reptiles live? We see lizards and snakes and turtles sometimes. Yesterday, my daughter had a violin concert in Fredericksburg. We were pulling into the parking lot. I had my wife and kids and a friend in the car, and they had the experience they sometimes have with me where the car suddenly came to a stop and everybody got whiplash a little bit. And I said, Sarah, look out your window. And she was like, okay. And looks out the window, and there's a lizard right there. I had to stop and make sure everything was okay. Well, I'll tell you what it is later. Anyway, neat lizard. They're everywhere. We've got lizards and snakes up in the trees. They're living in the trees around us. They are living on land, under bushes, underground in some cases, and certainly in the water around here too. So we've got reptiles really all around us.
in most cases hiding very, very well because they don't want anything to do with us. And so they're just doing their thing. They're living their life. A lot of them are nocturnal. And our best way to get along with them and keep everybody happiest is to leave them alone. But if you're really a curious naturalist, like many of the people in this room, that can be a little challenging sometimes. We want to see them. We want to experience them. So we'll take a look at some of the diversity that is found in this area. I want to talk a little bit about how we study reptiles. And this is just a taste. There's a lot of different ways we study reptiles. This, by the way, is a lovely checkered garter snake. And I want to take this moment to point out that I am not a good photographer. So the pictures that I'm going to show you are real legit pictures of the species that we're going to talk about, but they're not mine. Disclaimer, I copied them from the internet. Some of them might even be yours. So I'm not selling them. But they feature the species that we're interested in pretty nicely here. So one of the best ways to study reptiles is to get out there and find them. We do this at Schreiner. We take students out during the day, during the night. These are several pictures from our recent herpetology class that just finished. We go out, we look under things, we look among things. Sometimes we're listening, but sometimes we're just stumbling into the right place. Like this little lizard right here. We just happen to be walking in the right place. This thing is, if you can see it, this is a little green anole. And one of my students said, "There's a swimming lizard." And we were walking through the river, and I was like, "Yeah, I don't know. Like, lizards do a lot of things, and a lot of things swim, but lizards don't often swim. Not in this area. But this one was. It probably had fallen down, gotten startled from a tree or something, and we scooped it up and got some good photos with it, and then turned it loose, and it got on its way. So we're going to look at the big three groups that we have here: the snakes, the lizards, and the turtles. And we're going to start with the snakes. I want to say a couple of things about snakes, and then I'm going to turn it over to Amy, who's going to talk us through a lot of our local biodiversity. It's important that we know which species are dangerous so that we can protect ourselves and protect the snakes also. The most important thing that we can do if we don't know that a snake before us is dangerous is to leave it alone. We can just back away safely, right? I always tell people, if you're outside and you hear what sounds like a rattlesnake, if you think you might be encountering a rattlesnake, don't run away. You might trip and you might fall on the snake, and that wouldn't be good, right? So the first thing to do is stop, identify where the sound is coming from, and then slowly, carefully move in the opposite direction. Rattlesnakes do not chase people. There's a great new website out, a great new feature out. I think it came from NPR. It was just brought to my attention today about a program, I believe in Arizona, that's trying to get people aware of how to watch out for rattlesnakes and live most harmoniously with them so nobody gets hurt. And one of the most important things is to listen, right? And remember that they are not out to get you. When we hear a rattle, that is a warning that neither one of us wants to tangle with the other one. We'd really rather not. But even the very biggest rattlesnakes we have around here, I mean, I'm a big guy. I'm 200 pounds plus. If I step on a rattlesnake, that thing's going to die. Even if I get bit in the process, that rattlesnake, the biggest rattlesnakes we have around here are not bigger around than my wrist, and it'll get crushed. So it's rattling to tell me, let's just make a peaceful departure from one another right now. Okay, so little how-to on identifying the dangerous ones. Had to throw a couple of pictures of my kids in here. I've got great kids. Some of them like to go out and catch things. This is my son Theo with a water snake just downtown here in Kerrville the other day. There's low-hanging fruit, right? If we hear a rattle, that's a good sign that we've got a venomous snake nearby. All rattlesnakes are venomous. If you see and hear a rattle, but especially if you see that rattle at the end of the tail, it is a venomous snake. Some snakes that are non-venomous will mimic the sound of a rattle by flicking their tail quickly against dead vegetation. That's a pretty good defensive mimic. May or may not be venomous at that point, but if you see a rattle, it's for sure venomous. And our coral snakes, which are native, have a really striking color pattern, and if you are at a safe place to look closely, you might notice that the pattern has alternating colors, and many of you know the rhyme, If red is next to yellow, there's a rhyme that says red on yellow, kill a fellow. There it is. And red on black, friend to Jack or venom lack. Good. So we don't really have, right here in Kerrville, we don't have king snakes that have a red, black, yellow, black, red pattern. Although in lots of parts of North America there are. If you see red next to yellow, it is venomous. And coral snakes are in the cobra family. Their venom is much more like cobra venom than it is like rattlesnake or other viper venom. So I always tell my students, we don't mess with cobras. Okay. A lot of people, this just happened this week to me again. It happens pretty frequently. Have strong ideas about what a water moccasin is, and some of them are wrong. So when they say water moccasin, usually that is an expectation that the snake is venomous and as an excuse to kill it. A water moccasin, or similar, another name for the same species, cottonmouth, is a venomous snake, and it can be found in the hill country, although it turns out very rarely in Kerr County, but in the counties surrounding us for sure. Has a real similar pattern to our non-venomous water snakes. So the one on top here is a non-venomous water snake in genus Nerodia, and the one on the bottom is indeed a cottonmouth. This is in the viper group. There are a couple different ways to tell them apart, but if you see one, if you're out by the river or at a lake in Austin or something like that, if you see one, you might notice the scales. They're pretty big scales around the mouth. In our non-venomous water snakes, there's a dark band between each of these scales, which we don't see in the cottonmouth here on the bottom. And one of the ways, I hadn't really thought about this till somebody pointed it out to me, that gives it sort of the appearance of a big toothy grin. And if it looks like it has a big toothy grin with its mouth closed, that's a very good indication that it's a non-venomous water snake in genus Nerodia. If it doesn't have that big toothy grin, or you don't see it anyway, best to exercise caution. So we've got these two groups of venomous snakes in our areas. The vipers, which include all the rattlesnakes, and the cottonmouth and copperhead, and then the group that has the coral snakes as well. In our area, there's really, as far as rattlesnakes go, right close by, almost exclusively western diamondbacks, although there are blacktail rattlesnakes in the region as well. But a lot of snakes look like those guys. And that's all, that is an evolutionary strategy to not get dead, which is great. There are lots of reasons to mimic something that is in fact dangerous. It, I hope, is not an excuse to then kill something that might be dangerous. So the old saying, the only good snake is a dead snake, breaks my heart every time. Snakes serve many important functions in our ecosystems, and we want to leave them doing their thing and let us keep doing our thing too. So here are two examples of some venomous snakes. We've got our western diamondback rattlesnake on the left and our cottonmouth on the right. And these species all have patterns that look quite a lot like one or both of those. These are coupled with some behaviors in a few cases that can be even more convincing. So on the bottom right, we've got a non-venomous water snake. Again, if you can see the scales around the mouth, it looks kind of like a big toothy grin, but from a distance, it sure looks a lot like that cottonmouth right above it. They can even sometimes emphasize this appearance by sticking the corners of their jaws outward, giving their head a triangular appearance, the non-venomous ones. So it's a really good show. It's a really good, impressive mimic of a cottonmouth. These three, this is a bull snake, and here we've got a Texas rat snake, and here we've got a hognose snake. All of these have patterns that at least approximate the saddle-like diamond patterns on a lot of rattlesnake species. The bull snake especially will vibrate its tail, but a lot of these species will do that to try to put on a pretty good show. The bull snake even really is known to be, I try to stay away from the word aggressive, but it's pretty defensive. If it feels challenged, it will strike repeatedly at the vicinity of the intruder. And Amy will tell you a little bit more about what bull snakes do here in a minute. So we do have some mimics, but those are all, I think, really cool reasons to study reptiles. So, yes. Okay. Yes, I have heard this argument. So, for those of you who didn't hear, the idea that rattlesnakes have learned not to rattle so that we leave it, humans leave it alone. I am a big fan of rattlesnakes. Their brains are not that complex. Uh, what has happened though is that enough humans, this is especially true in the American Southwest, but it happens in other parts of the world too. Um, Enough humans have gone out in search of rattlesnakes to kill them on purpose. And it's the sound of the rattling very often that alerts a human to their presence, and then that rattlesnake is collected and killed or sold or whatever, taken to a rattlesnake roundup, those kinds of things, which means it gets killed or sold. Um, what we have here is a case of natural selection. This is evolution happening. It's not learning, it's natural selection. The ones who are predisposed to rattle are the ones who are getting collected out of the ecosystem. And the ones who are less inclined to rattle, because behaviors are traits, they are phenotypes, they are heritable. The ones who are less inclined to rattle are more likely to be left behind. And this is coupled by the probable situation that we know that hogs will eat rattlesnakes, and they may also selectively hunt rattlesnakes based on sound. So it might be humans and hogs kind of pushing this selection event. So we got rattlesnakes out there who are not trying not to rattle. It's just not in their nature. The ones who survived. It's kind of ironic, but we have to remember we as humans name them rattlesnakes. They didn't pick that label. So maybe in 100 years we'll have silent snakes with buttoned tails. I don't know. That's a good question though. I mentioned earlier that snakes are all around us. This is a beautiful, about 4.5, 5-foot Texas rat snake we caught about this time last year on Schreiner's campus. And you can see this really pretty pattern. You've got these diamondy shapes, and in between the scales, vibrant orange and yellow colors. Is a really striking snake, big animal. And I bring this to your attention because this is a pretty sizable organism. I was standing right next to it. Can you see it? It's right there. That's the snake. And just because of the way that this out here, it looks striking and colorful, behind a little bit of vegetation, it just totally breaks up its outline. It's nearly invisible. We didn't know it was there till it moved. Okay. And then I did what us jerky herpetologists do, and I ripped it out of its hiding place to look at it. But we put it back. Yes. Yes. It is. It's not that it's so tiny. We're only seeing about this much of its body in the brush here. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So, tell you what. Do I still have a mouse up here? No, that's all right. Anyway, if you can't see the snake, that's the point. It's really well camouflaged. It's really well hidden here. So they're around. They're doing good stuff. I have Amy here and another student, Marion, who's interested in herpetology. Just in the last 18 hours, found 2 of our smaller snake species just hanging out on campus because they were looking, because they knew where to look, where to find them. But those snakes are relying a lot on camouflage to maintain their security. So with that, we're going to get into a little bit about our local species diversity. And while we don't have time to go into all the details about all the species, we're going to get some highlights here, and I'm going to turn it over to Amy Lowe.
Hi, everyone. So to start, we have our 2 most common species of water snakes that we see here. And Dr. Distel talked about one of them briefly, which was the diamondback, which is right here. And as you can see the little vertical lines along its mouth and jaw. But another really defining trait about it is that it has this dark X pattern on the back of it. And so if you see one of those, that's where it gets its name, the diamondback. In comparison to the plain belly, which has as the name describes, a plain belly that's pale and doesn't have any markings on it. So next we have some of our garter snakes. The two of the most common are the checkered garter snake, which, as you can see, has a square checkered pattern that's super distinct. Along with that, it's got a pale line going down the back. Oh. It's got a pale line going down the back from kind of the neck area all the way to the tip of the tail. You also have the black neck garter snake, which has sort of a black ring along its neck and a orangish colored stripe going down its back as well. Next is the red striped ribbon snake, which, like the name suggests, it's got a big red stripe also going down its back. We found a couple of these, and we found ours near the banks of river in the water. I think we've also found some just on land as well. There's also the Texas line snake, which has these very distinct stripes of shades of like cream color down the middle and then darker browns, as well as Decay's brown snake, which can be like a brown to reddish color with, once again, a stripe going from the head to the tail. So these are some of the longest snakes that we find. One of them being the Texas rat snake, which was mentioned. And there are two types that you can find here. There's the Western rat snake, which is shown on the screen. And the way to tell the difference is the Western rat snake has a plain brown head, whereas the Great Plains rat snake has these stripes that form sort of a triangle shape on the top of the head if you're looking down in between the eyes. There's also the bull snake, which we also mentioned, and it's similar looking to the diamondback rattlesnake, and it's got some really interesting behaviors where it can make a hissing sound to kind of trick threats into thinking that it's a rattlesnake, despite it being non-venomous. There's also the yellow-bellied racer, which has a plain yellow belly going from the head all the way to the tip of the tail. There is the diamondback rattlesnake, which is venomous and has that distinct diamond pattern on its back. Also has right below the rattle these black and white stripes that are super prominent. Then there's also the coach whip, which are plain colored, but they can range through some really interesting colors. Many that you'll find will be light and pale and plain, but interestingly enough, some of them can appear this reddish pink color, which is super pretty. Some really unique snakes that we have in the area is the patch nose snake, which it's a little hard on the screen to see, but there is right at the tip of the nose is a super like pale spot that they have, along with a cream colored or pale line going down the back of the snake. There's also the hognose snake, which is over there. And the way to identify those is that they have a really pointed head with a nose that's kind of turned up, almost looking like a hog. And another really interesting behavior that they have is they are able to flatten out their heads to give them the appearance that they're bigger, which is scary to predators. Some of our least seen snakes are the rough green snake, which is bright green with a yellow belly. The Texas blind snake, which me and Marian actually found last night running around on campus, which they're very worm-like and they're super blunt. So their tail isn't very pointy. It almost, you almost can't really tell which one is the head and the tail. And then there's the ringneck snake, which has this yellow or orangish ring around its neck and then a brilliant red belly. They also have a really interesting behavior where they take their tails and they will curl it up into a spiral when they feel threatened. That'll hopefully trick predators into attacking the tail area rather than something as severe as their head. And then there's also the rough earth snake, which is a little brown snake that has keeled scales. So basically, that means that their scales have a ridge, which instead of appearing smooth like, say, the blind snake, it's got a bit more of texture to it. The flathead snake also looks very similar to some of these, but the way to identify those is it has a darker head than body. So its head will be darker brown compared to its light tan body.
She'll be back. She's here all week. One other thing I wanted to say about snakes is that I used some real intentional language earlier, which was about dangerous snakes to humans. That was not an exhaustive list of our venomous snakes. We do have snakes, some of which Amy just mentioned, that are venomous but aren't dangerous to humans, like the ringneck snake and like the hognose snake. And through a combination of venom potency, size of their mouth and ability to bite in the first place, or placement of the venom delivery systems, like our hognose has teeth way in the back of its mouth that deliver venom, they're extraordinarily unlikely to cause any trouble for humans at all. But they are technically venomous. So now we're going to jump over to lizards, many of which are around us. And this photo is a good reminder that they're around us quite often. We don't always see them. They blend in pretty well to their surroundings. But Amy's going to run us through a few of our lizard species.
So the lizards are actually my personal favorite. Those are the ones I got really into in class. And two of the ones you see here on screen that look really similar are the Texas spiny lizard and the Texas tree lizard. But the best way to tell those apart is you can kind of see on the Texas spiny lizard, it's got these two pale colored lines going down the side of it, kind of on the top of the back, but towards the side, whereas the Texas tree doesn't have that. Something else really interesting with the Texas spiny is that while it can appear lighter shades of brown and sometimes have like a red strip going from the neck down the back, it can change colors to appear almost black. This is part of helping to regulate their temperature, and those blend in really well. There's also the greater earless lizard, which you have probably seen these zooming past. They are super quick. They are kind of a white grayish color, and they have these two black lines that appear on their abdomens. And for males, they'll be closer to like the pelvis area. And they can also have shades of green and blue on them. You can kind of see a little bit in the picture underneath the belly right there. Some of the other ones that we commonly see are the ground skink, which is super smooth. And the way to see those is they have on the sides of their bodies these two stripes that are so dark they almost look black. And then there's also the Great Plains skink, which as a juvenile, so when they're young, they have black bodies and blue tails with like kind of these yellow spots on their face. But then as they get older, they appear to be light gray or tan, and the scales are surrounded kind of like by a dark black color. The four-line skink in the corner as a juvenile also appears to have a brown body and a blue tail. But that all becomes less distinct as they get older. The Texas spotted whiptail is best identified by looking at the spots on the belly and also on the side of it, along with the dark stripes, dark and green and yellow stripes running down the back. The green anole is, as it sounds, green, but it can also change colors to be brown. and the males have a bright pink dewlap right underneath their neck. The Texas alligator lizard has larger scales on it, and it's sort of in an irregular pattern, so it's not straight up and down stripes or spots or anything like that. Another species that we have here, and our only invasive reptile, is the Mediterranean gecko. And these are super common. You've probably seen them running up the sides of the walls at your house, in your backyard. And they can be all sorts of shades of brown and tan, or they can be kind of like the one on screen, gray with some like pink spots mixed in. They're super small, only a couple inches. Oh, she asked how big they were, what size they were. They're only a couple inches.
All right, so that's a quick rundown of our lizards. Last group we'll cover is the turtles. Katie? Yeah, well, it is worth mentioning that probably the most famous lizard in Texas is Texas horned lizard or horny toad. We are technically in its historical range, but the odds of seeing one in Kerrville or Kerr County are next to none. There are populations in the hill country. They're usually pretty isolated, although some of you may have property that has them or have been to properties that have them. But right here in town, and this is true in most even slightly urbanized areas these days, horned lizards are gone. There are great efforts to reintroduce them, and San Antonio Zoo is one of the leaders in those efforts. But we don't have them right here in town. Yes. So the question was, is Kerr County a biodiverse region based on the variety of niches and sizes and things like that? A number of people have weighed in on this, and I won't take credit for any of their opinions, but I will share that almost everybody who studies biodiversity at the landscape scale agrees that the Edwards Plateau here, the Texas Hill Country, is one of the most biodiverse regions, certainly in North America, possibly the world. So it's a great confluence of different types of ecosystems. We've got influences of desert, but also influences of coast, influences of forest, influences of hills with relief and springs. Just such a nice diversity of habitat that yes, we do have a biodiverse place. I will say, as reptiles go, though, the majority of snakes and lizards tend to be found in arid places. And so if you went farther west from here, you would see generally greater diversity of snakes and lizards. Okay. Our last group is turtles, and I want to point out, and just I think probably most folks in the room know this, but cartoons might lead us to believe otherwise. Turtles cannot be safely removed from their shells. They are not like hermit crabs, who don't even live in their own shells. The shell is part of the turtle's skeleton. So every year, veterinarians and zoos and rehabs get a number of turtles brought in with limbs or heads or tails missing, sometimes in the hand of the perpetrator, because out of ignorance, not out of malice, people thought they wanted to take the turtle out of the shell and see what it looked like. You cannot do that safely. That will harm the animal. So please don't do that, and tell your friends. Okay, turtles.
So to start, we have some of our pond turtles, one of which is the red-eared slider, which you've probably seen a lot of those around. And those are best identified by the red stripe along the side of their head that's right next to their eye. They can also appear to be melanistic, in which case they do not have the red stripe, and they'll have like super dark shells. The Texas river cooter is best identified by its bright yellow super patterned face, and underneath the shell kind of along the like the ridge of it, you'll see these super distinct circle patterns. The Kegel's map turtle also has patterns on its face, but it is not as bright as the river cooter. It's kind of more of a pale yellow. On the top of their shell, they also it kind of spikes up a little bit. Kegel's map turtle. And this is kind of showing how they would look if they're melanistic. So that's like the red-eared slider right there. Basically they're like darker colored, so they're not as vibrant. Next we have the mud and the musk turtles, and to start we have our stink pot, which is super tiny. They're super cute, but they will bite you if they can get a hold of your fingers. They have light colored stripes on the side of their head. There's one along the jaw and then kind of near the eye. And their plasteron, which is the underside of their shell, females, their plasteron is like tighter together, whereas males it's a little further apart, the scutes. Then there's the yellow mud turtle, which has a super bright yellow neck that's plain and doesn't have a lot of pattern underneath it. Do they? Do this, the question was, do the stink pots stink? Yeah. Yeah. So next we have some of our odd turtles, starting with the common snapping turtle, which is best identified by its super long tail that almost looks like a saw. It has ridges on the top of it that give it a saw shape. There's also the spiny soft shell turtle, which gets its name because along the ridge of the shell are these small triangular spines. And the one here in this area also has tiny spots or dots along the top of the carapace, as well as a sort of cone-shaped snout. So it's not quite as round as some of the other ones might be. There's also the ornate box turtle, which has a more flattened carapace or shell, so it's not quite as round as some of the other ones would be, and lines radiating from the center of the shell outward. There's also the Texas tortoise, which has a, unlike the box turtle, a super round shell, and its scutes kind of point up and have a yellow or orangish dot in the center of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. It's a great experience for our Schreiner students to be able to do this. So I appreciate you all allowing that to happen. As we wrap up, I would just point out that the threats to reptiles, certainly in our area, but globally, are in many ways similar to the big picture threats we see to a lot of groups of biodiversity. A good study came out in 2021 looking at the status and trends of reptile populations and species at the global level, citing the usual suspects: agriculture, deforestation, habitat modification, urbanization. Those are the big players in habitat loss, of course, which means less places to hide, less places to reproduce, so less individuals over time. I thought it would be a good idea, since we are in the age of AI, to just see what AI comes up with when you put in Texas Master Naturalist turtle person. And this is what we get. So this is what some set of algorithms thinks not only you all look like, but what turtles look like in Texas. So again, scrutinize, scrutinize, scrutinize. Yes, in the back. Great question. So the question was, as you encounter turtles crossing a road, which does tend to happen often late spring, early summer, as they go to breeding sites or to lay eggs, if you're going to help them, what's the best way to do that? The first thing to consider in a situation like that, and this sounds silly, but it's totally true, is there oncoming traffic? Because you shouldn't stop your car and get out in traffic. But if you are able to safely move the turtle, you want to move it the direction that its head is pointing. So don't move it. So if it has just started crossing the road, and you put it back on the closest side, even though that's the side it's pointed away from, it is likely just to try to cross the road again after you leave. So you want to try to place it in whatever direction it's facing so that it can go on about its business. Okay. On behalf of the Schreiner University Field Station, I really want to thank you for your time. And if we've got time for questions, I've got questions and answers and stories for you. Yes, Alice. Yes. I saw one question come up about blotched water snakes. That's a great question. Blotched water snakes are one of the non-venomous water snake species, pretty widespread species, but we don't have them right here in this area. Our plain belly water snake looks a fair bit like blotched water snakes, but that's not a species that we have right here. That was it?
There was one more
Yes.
question from the chat room. Can I go ahead and ask that?
Yes, Carl. Ask the question.
Go ahead. Carla,
Oh,
in the chat room.
okay,
We'll
thank
take your
you.
question when you're ready.
All right, sorry, I thought I heard someone talking. So there is one more question about geckos, and the question is, do we have a native gecko? They thought that the picture of the Mediterranean one didn't look like the ones we see around here on our window screens.
Great question. So the question was, do we have a native gecko? There are native geckos in North America and some in Texas, not here in our area. So the ones you see climbing up your window screens in the Texas Hill Country, unless somebody has moved one, I should add that our native geckos aren't great climbers, are almost certainly Mediterranean geckos. Now, like many of our lizards, they have the capacity for some color change. They can express a little more melanin. They can retract some of that melanin. So they may look really pale on your window screen at night, especially if you're getting ready for bed, you flip on the light in the bathroom, you see a lizard on your window, and you're looking at its belly. It'll look very, very pale on the belly side. And so in some cases, you can even see their internal organs, or in females, you can see eggs forming. It's pretty neat. But they have real thin, translucent belly skin. The skin on the dorsal surface, on the back and the top, is more pigmented, but sometimes parts of it can be translucent as well. Some of them are pretty brown. Some of them are pretty pale. Some of them are very distinctly patterned with high contrast markings, and some of them are fairly blurry. So we see a wide variability in the markings of Mediterranean geckos, not just here, but in all the places they're introduced, which is a lot of different parts of the world. Good question. In the back there. What's the field station mean? Thank you. Good question. Schreiner University has a biological field station, and we certainly invite you to come check it out sometime. We have about 30 acres of upland site. This is in the same spot that some of you may know. Kerrville Hills has recently planted a vineyard right adjacent to campus on Main Street. It's where our observatory is also, and we do star parties out there. We do a lot of biological research there. Excuse me. An extension of our field station on the opposite side of campus. We've got about 30 acres between campus proper and the Guadalupe River in the floodplain. So great opportunities for outdoor research, biodiversity research with students. We've had some of the folks associated with this group come check that out. Tom Collins and some friends, Sherry Wilson, have been out there to do butterfly surveys For NABA, we've started building, and I thank Katie for mentioning, started building bird blinds as part of the Kerrville Bird Observatory Network. The first one's up. We're having a number of delays about signage, but the bird blind is there with feeders in it. So if you're on Main Street by Schreiner and you see the red fire hydrant, there's a bird blind up. Check it out. You just walk right up to it. Yes. That's a great question. So the question is, with humans, mammals, but especially humans being so different from reptiles, having diverged hundreds of millions of years ago, are the fears that humans have about reptiles innate or are they learned? And the answer, I think, is a combination of those things. There are very good reasons to be afraid of or be cautious of snakes if you don't know which ones are venomous. And we see those kinds, and some good evidence for not just humans, but lots of species come from the idea that non-venomous snakes flick their tails to rattle because it works across species. They can scare a hawk doing that, or they can scare a human doing that. And that's because we have over time not done well when we heard rattling and put our face down there to see what was going on, right? However, we can learn search images. We can inherit behaviors that avoid or go towards certain search images. And if the search image is just snake, then we will avoid snakes. We can innately do that. We can learn fear of snakes. We can learn fear of all kinds of things, right? We can learn fear of spiders. We can learn fear of student loans. We can learn fear of all manner of things. However, with exposure and with accumulation of knowledge, we at least have the capacity to discriminate between which ones might be dangerous and which ones might be not, and learn and enjoy from those kinds of questions. I hope that answered your question. That was a big one. Katie. So the question was behavior when snakes shed their skin. Unlike a lot of species, many of you know, unlike a lot of vertebrate species, snakes shed their skin more or less in one piece. And Katie found a snake skin hanging in her tree. That was almost certainly a rat snake. Rat snakes are good climbers. They're our best climbers as snakes go. A few other species do climb, but not as well as rat snakes. However, when snakes are shedding, it's pretty common that they will find some sort of object to push up against. And if it's a little bit rough, if it's got some texture, that'll help kind of hold on to that skin as they work their way out of it. They can't obviously grab hold with limbs and pull the skin off. So they do use environmental objects, rocks and bark and even soil to get any traction at all to help pull that skin off when it's time to shed. What is my favorite reptile we've found this year and why? I am terrible with favorites. I don't know, all of them. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Everything's got cool stories. I love finding water snakes because they have such an attitude. I love finding the stink pot with the herpetology class. Somebody asked if they stink. The one that we found actually didn't, but a lot of turtles, as a defensive measure, will release musk, which can smell pretty bad. Stink pot is well known for releasing musk, and it comes in such a tiny package. It's surprising sometimes how much it smells. I'll have to think on the favorites. I'll have to think on that. Yes. Okay, good. The question is the difference between a turtle and a tortoise. And actually, I'm going to back up because I'd like to use a visual as a guide here. We have, in Texas, we have one native tortoise, the Texas tortoise, one of 3 native tortoises in North America. The tortoise group is a specific lineage within the turtles, the bigger group of turtles. The tortoises have evolved to become almost entirely terrestrial. They don't have webbed digits. In fact, their feet are almost club-like. They're meant to support and move slowly with armor through terrain. Their defense is the armor, not their speed or anything like that. Whereas the pond turtles in some of the previous slides, or even the snapping turtle or soft-shell turtle, have a great deal of defense in the ability to swim quickly away from danger. Tortoises don't do that. So the tortoises have really heavy shells. The top part of the shell is called the carapace, and the bottom part is called the plastron. Both the carapace and the plastron extend far down so that they almost meet nearly all the way around the animal, and it gives it just a great deal of protection against terrestrial predators. The kinds of things that these would likely encounter include coyotes and raccoons, and in some parts of their range, alligators, hawks. Whereas other lineages of turtles have also separately evolved toward a mostly terrestrial life. The box turtle group is actually much more closely related to the red-eared slider and the map turtles than it is to tortoises. But the box turtles are almost completely terrestrial. This photo comes from a friend of mine, Dr. Danette Vines, who teaches chemistry at Schreiner University. And this one hangs out in her yard and appears to come back year after year. It doesn't hurt that occasionally she tosses a few grapes out in the yard. And it really likes the fruit. But these box turtles don't swim well, and they'll sometimes soak in water, but for the most part, they're terrestrial. So it has as much to do with their lineage as it does to do with their lifestyle. But tortoises are all terrestrial. There's another T name that goes with this group sometimes, the terrapins, and sometimes people are real specific about which turtle things are terrapins, that they might just be this one lineage of turtles that lives in coastal areas, or it might be anything that they decide is terrapin-ish, and that's fine. I try to be cautious about some of the common names because for a lot of reasons, people come to an awareness of species, through different life stories, and the names that they were told are the ones that often stick, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's one of the reasons why we, in scholarship, we use scientific names to try to be consistent about things, although I'm not going to get on a soapbox. I'm not going to get on a soapbox here, but my students know that the entire framework of species is a little loose as it is, and if you want to talk more about that sometime, I'm happy to. Bob. Good question. So the question is, or the framework is that water moccasins are aggressive, and by this you mean like the venomous ones, right? The cottonmouth water moccasin. That they're aggressive, and is there something different that you should do if you encounter one? Like arguably all North American snakes, there are some exceptions elsewhere, but all North American snakes, they're not really aggressive. They're not proactive in that way, although cottonmouths are fairly curious. So if you're on a boat, if you're fishing or something, if they notice the smell of fish nearby, they're not unlikely to come see what's going on. And in some places that are heavily fished, I think of the lake in downtown Austin, got lots of cottonmouths there. People, when they see cottonmouth, sometimes will toss at a fish, and then you get some of these learned behaviors that they associate with humans, a source of food. Still, I would say, and cottonmouths are pretty likely to swim at the surface of the water, and they're heavy-bodied snakes, so they're pretty conspicuous. You might see them more often than the 200 other snakes that are around you that you don't notice because they're well camouflaged or they're under the water. So I would say that, in short, which I was not short, in short, they're not really aggressive. And they do display when they are feeling threatened. If you startle one, they get their name from this whitish lining in their mouth. They'll open their mouth and gape at you as an indication that this is my business equipment. Don't mess with me. But that doesn't mean that people don't get bitten either. People engage with snakes, again, from a variety of backgrounds.
Got two more questions from the chat, if I
Go,
can.
go ahead in the chat. Let's take some from the chat.
Okay, one is, do we have timber rattlesnakes in Central Texas?
Do we have timber rattlesnakes in Central Texas? So timber rattlesnakes are a species of rattlesnake that has evolved for primarily swampy, foresty kinds of areas. Also goes by the name canebrake rattlesnake, and is found all along the Gulf Coast from southeastern United States, the Carolinas and Florida, through the South and into Texas, but not as far west as we are. We don't have timber rattlesnakes right here, although they are in Texas.
Okay, and another one is, are the plastrons of male and female turtles different?
Great question. Are the plastrons of male and female turtles different? So as a reminder, the plastron is the belly shell. And the short answer is it depends on the species. Some species have a little bit of difference. Amy mentioned some of the turtles where the spacing of the scutes, kind of where they come together in males, may be more spread out, so that he can wrap his tail around, and that's where his copulatory organ is. It's built right into his tail. So he can wrap that around and successfully mate with a female. The female doesn't need to do any of that tail wrapping, so her plastron may be pretty even or almost even around the edge. Many species have plastrons that, just because of the way they're built, don't get in the way of mating. But in a couple of species, and this box turtle group is a great example, they are substantially different. Not only can they have differences in where the tail is, but in male box turtles, kind of in the middle of the belly, they have a concave depression, because when they approach a female from behind, if you'll bear with my hands here as example box turtles, when the male approaches a female from behind, it's just too cumbersome to get close enough to successfully mate. So that depression it literally nests against the top of her shell on the back and allows him to get just close enough for successful mating. The females don't have that feature. Yes. Good question. So the question was about the invasiveness of the Mediterranean gecko and whether there are control efforts that are effective or whether that kind of thing is pursued. In invasive species biology, there are always people exploring control efforts of invasive species. And so, yes, there are efforts being made to mitigate any potential impact of Mediterranean geckos. I think it's important to consider, and I suspect I'm preaching to the choir here, that if there's an invasive species present, just because we as humans don't immediately perceive a threat or a problem or a challenge to native species, doesn't mean it's not happening. So I tend to stay pretty cautious where invasive species are concerned, although there's not a bunch of evidence that suggests that Mediterranean geckos are ruining much. They're not like, in the sense of like fire ants, for example, or feral hogs. Those are real obvious effects on people and human resources used by humans. Less so with the Mediterranean geckos. They're small. So the real concerns here come in like competing with native species and as disease vectors. Could they be carrying diseases to other species that we haven't really detected yet? The jury's largely out on them, but I will say they're invasive so many places in the world. They're an extremely adaptable species. They do well in urban environments. And so the opportunity to study them and study mitigation strategies certainly exists.
Have it.
Familiarity with Lake Somerville and the snakes there. I don't personally know.
Got a chat comment and question?
Okay, let me finish this one and then I'll take the chat.
Okay.
So large snakes in Lake Somerville in the Post Oak area that circle around people. Sure. Both water moccasins and the non-venomous water snake group can get relatively large, 4 feet plus. Some getting even bigger. And so the person asking the question is holding up their hands to show the girth. Both the cottonmouth, which is the venomous one, and the non-venomous ones are relatively heavy-bodied snakes. They can, not only are they naturally heavy-bodied, but some of them can eat extraordinarily large fish for the apparent size of their head. Their jaws can stretch out a lot. So if they're successful, if there's a lot of fish available, or frogs, if that's what they prefer, they may be very well fed and have recently had a meal. Often, water snakes eat more often than those that eat mammals and birds. And so it's not at all uncommon to see really heavy-bodied snakes in the water. With that said, though, I will say that all snakes can swim. So just because we see one in the water doesn't mean, or even a group in the water, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a cottonmouth or in the water snake genus Nerodia. Okay, fair enough. One more from the chat.
Okay, so the question is, do you recall the story of Owen and Z, the orphan hippo who adopted the old giant tortoise as his mother? And are tortoises normally affectionate with humans and other species?
All right. I'm not familiar with that particular story. Are tortoises affectionate with humans and other species? I hate to anthropomorphize too much. That affection in the world of a tortoise would feel something like affection in the world of a human. For goodness sake, we are not all affectionate the same way. But certainly tortoises can be very tolerant of humans and other species, especially when there's food and security involved. So a lot of people keep tortoises as pets. I know people who do that both for pleasure and for research. And some of them really appear to enjoy contact with humans, eating out of your hand. Makes me nervous. They only have to bite a little bit in one direction to take a chunk of skin with it, but certainly they can coexist reasonably well as long as there's food provided. So I really want to thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I want to thank Amy Lowe for sharing as well. And if you have any interest in checking out the field station, here's my contact info. You can check us out on Instagram at SU Field Station as well. Thanks, everybody.